This is the Sony NEX-5N, and this camera launched in 2011, so it's a pretty old mirrorless camera, but it has some significant upgrades over the Sony NEX-5, which is the camera that this camera replaced. And it's worth making its own video about the 5N because there's actually some significant differences between the 5 and the 5N. So we're going to talk about that in this video, starting with the very first thing, which is going to be the 16.1 megapixel sensor that this camera was updated with. So they used to shoot on a 14 megapixel sensor with the NEX-5 line, and I think the NEX-3 had the 14 megapixel sensor as well. So the 5N gets the updated sensor, and we can see some significant improvements in image quality for both photo and video specs. I notice it more in the video specs than I do the photo specs. I'll flash some images here on the screen and you can just see that these photos look incredible. I'm very pleased with the images that I was able to create from this camera. I picked up this camera for $100 on Facebook Marketplace, and it actually came with the kit lens as well. So this is the 16 to 55, the 18 to 55 f3.5 to 5.6 variable aperture lens. I mean, this is just your standard kit lens. It's nothing special, but all of the images that you're seeing on screen right now utilize the NEX-5N with this kit lens. And I was able to create some incredible results. So that just goes to show you what matters is the photographer behind the camera, not necessarily what camera you're using or what lens you're using. So those images, all kit lens and the NEX-5N. Some other important things to note are going to be, we get full manual video control, which we did not see on the NEX-5 model. Now, I think there are some like firmware hacks where you can maybe update the firmware on the 5 to be able to get at least aperture control during video. And there are some maybe third-party hacks that you can do to get full manual video control. I will let you look into that if you want to try that. But natively, it comes out of the box ready to shoot in full manual video control, which is such an essential thing for anyone who's wanting to do video production with this camera, okay? You get 1080p at both 24 frames and 60 frames a second. And the slow motion actually looked really good. I'll show you a couple slow-mo clips. There aren't a lot of artifacts or noise when you slow the camera down to that 60p format. So I was actually really impressed with the slow-mo on this camera. It's totally usable. If you shoot in 1080p, this camera will get you good, reliable video results at 60p and 24 frames a second. With this camera, you still get the old AVC HD format, which I'm not a huge fan of. Definitely doesn't have as much depth in regards to color information or detail in your video files. But if you're just a beginner, it'll totally be enough to get you started making videos, even like this one that I'm making right here. I wanted to be able to hold the NEX-5N in this video, so I'm not filming on that camera right now, but I will show some B-roll shot at these exact same setup right now. I'm gonna swap the NEX-5N on the tripod so you can see what it would look like if you were shooting in a studio setup. I have a microphone overhead with a key light and a background light and a couple other background lights here. So you can see what it looks like in this scene right now as I throw the NEX-5N on my tripod stand. With the 5N, you also get touchscreen functionality. I will say it's not the best touchscreen I've ever seen, but you do get touchscreen functionality, which you did not get with the NEX-5. And on the photo side, you of course get RAW file formats as well as JPEG. With the 5N, we also inherit a boost to our frames per second shooting, which it increases from 7 frames a second from the 5. The 5N gets 10 frames a second, and this is what that sounds like. So a little bit faster, 10 frames a second. It'll be pretty good, but you can see I already hit the buffer. So that was like, 7 shots or so before the buffer actually filled up. And so pretty quickly after you can start shooting again, but 10 frames a second, it's a little bit quicker for if you're wanting to shoot action or moving subjects that you would like to shoot multiple images at a time and not just shoot one photo at a time. So you get 10 frames a second there. Okay, and that's most of the good stuff about the 5N. Now I wanna mention some things that I don't love about the 5N, starting with the low light performance is not the best. I'd say if you can shoot under 3200 ISO, that's gonna benefit you. So low light situations are not the best, okay? However, I have seen, 6400, you can get usable results. If you really need to crank your shutter speed up for some reason and you have to shoot in a more well-lit environment, but you need a faster shutter speed, which forces you to raise your ISO, you can get away with shooting around 6400 ISO, but I wouldn't go above 6400, okay? So low light performance, not the best with this camera. We also see this horrible, I hate this like tilt up screen, okay? This doesn't do anything for me really. Like I guess if you're shooting a little bit underneath your chin or your face, It's okay for like filming purposes, but other than that, there's like no really reason to have like a 3-inch tilt screen, okay? This is all it does. It's not great. We saw this on the NEX-5 as well, so I don't love the 3-inch tilt screen. The menu system is the same menu system from the NEX-5 series, so you get the older, this is again like 2 versions previous to what we have now in a lot of these newer Sony cameras, like the FX3, which is what I'm filming on now, the A7S III, etc. That's that new menu system, which I really enjoy. Then you have like the A7 III, A6000 line of Sony cameras. That was the last version of the Sony menu systems. This is a version even previous to that, so I'm not a big fan of that menu system. It feels like an old video game controller or something. It's not my favorite menu, but you can obviously use it to navigate the menu and change your settings, which is all you really need in this camera. I also really wish we had a dedicated ISO button on the body somewhere, because I can change my aperture and my shutter speed, but I can't change my ISO, which is really frustrating, especially because I kind of like when I'm shooting video, and since this camera can actually shoot reliable video, I like having the ability to set my shutter speed, which should never change. If you're shooting 24 frames a second, you should be at double that, so 1/48 or 1/50, right? So your shutter speed should not change, and usually your aperture, you want to set that and leave that the same. So the only thing you're usually changing is your ISO setting or an ND filter on the front of your lens. And there's no quick way to do that with this camera. So not even when you're recording video or taking stills, you gotta go into the menu system, to the brightness and color, and then change your ISO there. I do not love that interface, that workaround, how you have to go in and change your ISO that way. That is not my favorite style of how to change my ISO. You of course do not get log shooting on this camera, and you actually get no picture profiles of any kind like we've seen them in the newer Sony cameras, okay? So no S-Cinetone, no HLG, no ITU 709, none of those different color space options, okay? No picture profiles. You can choose from some different creative styles, like vivid or portrait mode or black and white, and what I'd actually recommend you doing is switching this camera into the portrait mode setting. I noticed that the contrast feels a lot smoother and the colors feel a lot smoother when I'm filming in the portrait mode setting, and I also lower my contrast by about 3. And then I leave my saturation the same depending on what I'm doing. If I'm shooting a really vibrant scene, I might lower that saturation by 1. And then my sharpness, I tend to just lower by 1 as well. And I can add that sharpening back in post-production if I'd prefer. So that's my little hack. I would use those settings to make this camera perform the best for video exposure. And then obviously for photos, just shoot in the RAW file format so you get the most information and preserve the most data in your image. So overall thoughts on the NEX-5N are, I definitely would recommend, if you can find the 5N online over the NEX-5, I'd always 100% of the time go for the 5N, specifically for the ability to shoot in reliable 60 frames a second and shoot in manual video exposure, okay? That's huge for me as a video creator. I need the ability to adjust my video settings, and I just couldn't do that on the NEX-5, which I actually have right here, okay? See, I still have the NEX-5. It's a solid camera for photography, but the 5N just outperforms it for the video specs. So if you're in the hunt for a video camera, look for the 5N. They can be found anywhere from as low as $80, body only, all the way up to $180 or $200, okay? So you gotta time the market right and make sure that you're purchasing your camera when it's at a lower peak. A hack is, don't purchase this with a lens. I found a steal on Facebook Marketplace where I got a lens, the kit lens came with it, okay? For $100 total, okay? So, I mean, figure out what this is worth. It's about $40 to $80 online. So I got the camera, you know, it's like, do the math, however you want to split this cost, right? 50 and 50. I got this camera for a steal, okay? So you just got to time the market right. The NEX-5 is always a little bit cheaper than the 5N, depending on who you're looking at. So just be patient, time the market right. If you want the 5, if you're just a photographer and you can only find the 5, it's gonna do great for photos. But the 5N has some substantial improvements when it comes to video specs, okay? And then there, of course, is the NEX-5R, which I really enjoy this camera. I'm gonna do a full review about the 5R because the 5R inherits a lot of the good features about the 5N, but adds some great functionality to this camera that is worth talking about and paying for the upgrade if you can find this guy online somewhere. So lots more to come on this channel. This is a review of the 5N. I hope you guys found this helpful. If you guys enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I have a ton more videos on this channel right here. You can check out the review of the Sony NEX-5 if you want, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Much love.